Hello and welcome to the Shaken Up Show, the show that focuses itself on all things Bury AFC. I'm your host, Nick, and we have a bumper episode today. Firstly, I'm joined by Michael Calvin. Michael is an author and journalist. He's currently got a book out called Whose Game Is It Anyway? And he's the mastermind behind the BT Sport documentary, which went out a little bit earlier this year. It's called Ours, and we got a little feature on it, Bury AFC, little old Bury AFC. He's joined by James Bentley. James is a member of our Heritage Committee, and he also starred in the documentary. He gave a really passionate monologue just at the beginning of the show. He has also written 2 books, The Forgotten 15 and Things Can Only Get Better, which concentrates on the past of Bury Football Club. Okay, thank you very much, James and Michael, for joining me today. So Michael, obviously you created a fantastic documentary a little bit earlier on in the year, and James participated in it. So just tell us a little bit about how you got in contact with James and how he got involved in the project.
Well, I'd noticed James on Twitter. James is a very as part of the research for my book, Whose Game Is It Anyway? I wanted to try and examine what it is like to lose your football club. And the stuff that I've done in the past has a sort of reputation for looking at the human side of the game. And I read all the commercial stuff, the machinations in boardrooms and let's say dubious. But I wanted to look at it from a different perspective, that of the fan, and what happens when the club that you've supported all your life suddenly, through no fault of your own, doesn't exist. So I made contact with James, and we met up at the station, and I was really struck by sparing his blushes, but I was really struck by James's passion in the way that he articulated what it means to someone when they do lose something as intrinsic to their life as their football club, and that void that suddenly consumes you. And I'd never heard a fan talk with such eloquence and emotion and empathy. And to be honest, that after that day, it was always going to be a chapter in the book anyway. I went on to a Bury AFC game to meet Chris and Phil. But also I looked at that and thought, well, James in many ways is a spokesman for this generation of football supporter. And that's why, we hatched up the idea of James opening the documentary. And the documentary as a whole is to look at that relationship, that fundamental relationship between a supporter and his football club. And that's why I looked in the documentary at a much broader sort of tableau, really, which brings in the different fan-based models that are out there.
So my next bit is really to James, really. James, what was it like when Michael asked you to meet and told you a little bit about his idea and about kind of what he was looking into for his book? And obviously this later went into your documentary. How did you feel to be contacted by obviously an established author and journalist like Michael?
I did feel really honoured by it. I mean, in many ways, like Mike said in his answer before, it was as though I was being asked to voice how Bury fans felt about that day in August 2019, when 11:05 at night, the news comes through on Tuesday, August 27th, that your club is no longer a member of the Football League, when it's been there for so long. And yeah, it's, as I say, it's an honour, but you're talking about what is effectively the worst moment of your life, barring any family bereavements or anything like that. It's certainly a moment I'll never forget, and it's a moment I'd never want to go through again. I'd never want any other fan of any other club to go through either, because like Mike says, when your football club is so intrinsic to who you are as a person, you could talk to people who worked with me 20 years ago and they wouldn't remember how I had my tea, but they'd remember what I was like on a Monday morning after Bury had won. And, it's the defining characteristic of your life. It's everything about who you are. I remember when I used to work at Asda part-time as a student, I'd come in on Saturday night shifts, 6 till 9, and the girls on the deli would say straight away, "We know how Berry you've done when we look at your face." He's either, "Oh, don't talk to me," or, just if he's a bit indifferent, then all right, they've drawn. If he's walking on the air, then they've won. And it has such a hold over your life, your football club and their results. And even still today, I measure out, Nick Hornby said this in Fever Pitch, I measure out periods in my life as two numbers with a silent slash between them. I was putting my CV together. I'm out of work at the moment. I'm looking for a new job. I was rejigging my CV and I was thinking, well, 17, 18, yeah, I was working at the University of Manchester, because I remember going to the Sunderland game in the League Cup on the day that I finished, when Stephen Dawson got injured. And, you could say that was a very pivotal turning point in the history of Bury Football Club, that injury, when Stephen Dawson went down, because, it symbolised everything starting to crash down around our ears. But that is another story entirely. To be asked to talk about the worst moment in my life in terms of football was a privilege, and I'd hope I did us all justice with it.
And Michael, you kindly allowed James to open the documentary with this incredible monologue that he penned himself, and in walking through the kind of silent streets around Gig Lane. Is that something that you wanted to kind of honour him with when you first met him, and thought this guy could do this, he could hold this? And me on the second question back to James was, what was it like to write that for the opening of the documentary, and having that kind of weight of this whole piece that's been that Michael's been working on for the best part of a couple of 18 months or so, pinned on you basically, and pinned around you. So yeah, Michael, so first of all, what the monologue, what did you make to it?
Can I just jump in there, Nick?
Yeah.
Mike actually wrote the monologue.
It was
It was stitched together from bits that Mike said in it.
Go on, Mike. Sorry. We're just talking about the monologue at the start.
Okay, cool. Well, I wanted James to speak for himself, but also for every fan, as a dispassionate but obviously emotionally engaged observer. I wanted James to speak for everyone, basically. Now, the makeup of that monologue is actually taken from the interview that we'd done on the station that day. Because I always work transparently with my subjects, I'd sent James the transcription of the interview, and because I did find it very, very powerful and very, very convincing. So I wanted to make the point that this film is about one fan's experience, but it's about much more than that. It's an experience that any football supporter can identify with, even though they've not gone through the trauma of having their club taken away from them. So I thought it was I hoped it was very, very powerful because it was so relevant to the viewer.
And James, the filming process, walking around the streets of around Gig Lane, those empty streets, those cobbled roads, and it was just so silent and so and it's the same journey that you've made, a million times. I think we've all done that walk. We've all done it. What did it feel like to have a bunch of cameras following that emotion, and how did you feel about that?
It's almost validating your support for the club, and when you think these people these professionals who can give it the treatment, they can make it look absolutely fantastic on TV, but they value how we felt as fans to be able to want to film it. So they're filming it because they care about what we went through, and they want to tell the story of what we went through. And walking, like you say, there were silent streets. The fact I was able to walk down Horn Street in the centre of the road, with that view of the stand at the bottom, tells you how empty they were. There was not a soul about, and even the motorcycle team weren't on the car park. And Gig just stands as this empty monument, this empty cathedral to everything that we loved, and that all we have now for it is our memories. And it's very sad. You think about, as you say, we've done that walk a million times, and you think about when you walk down that road before Millwall in 1997, before we played Man City the same year. When you one of 12,000 people walking down towards that ground with that common aim, you've got that feeling in your belly that we're playing Man City tonight. Well, this is the biggest home game I've ever seen in my life, and I'm so excited for it. And now there is no excitement like that connected to Bury Football Club because of the actions of a couple of, as Mike says, rogue owners. One who plunged the club into the ground and the other one who hammered the coffin shut. And I do love that walk. I love, everything about it. I love remembering the anticipation I felt when I went to get my first season ticket in 1988. Me and my dad went down in the 88 close season. And, I was excited then to be, the fact I was going to be part of what was always a mythical world that I didn't know anything about. And I was going to be part of it. And it was, as I said before, going to be something that would define who I was for the next 31 years of my life.
Michael, we saw you in the Stanley Club and speaking to kind of like some journalists and people. And what was your sense of the feeling around Gig Lane and around that area as an outsider, if somebody doesn't live in the town? How did you feel at the time? And did any kind of emotion kind of drift through the air of this kind of huge empty void?
Yeah, what it proved to me is that football clubs are not about bricks and mortar. The site of Gig Lane was bereft, basically, and I found the shrines, which had been up. You could see signs of impending decay in the buildings, but it's not about buildings, it's about people. And the people were reflected in the shrines, and the entreaties on the flags or the T-shirts, which had been bleached by the sun over the previous summer, the messages on shirts, which had become mildewed and mottled with mold over the period of time. I found that really, it was a very much like, when we go around, the monument at the base of a tree where someone tragically had lost their life in a car accident, having hit that tree. And there's a small wooden cross there, and flowers are put down periodically, and the flowers wither and die. And I got that same sense from Gig Lane that day, where it had that air of, I mentioned at the time, an unkept grave. And what was interred in that football ground was something which is quite intangible, but absolutely central to so many people's lives. It was their football club and their experience and their friends and the day-to-day human relationships that football enables you to generate and develop. So I found it, very sad, very moving. And we put a drone camera up that day, and I found that that opening shot that we had over the stands, it's strange, really. You're looking at something that appears to be a football ground, a working football ground. The pitch looked decent. The stands were still, painted as they'd always had been, but there was something really empty about it all. And I suppose that was what really came home to me that day, that, look, the football club is dead. And, we can maybe go on to the other thing that really did surprise me is the level of, frankly, animosity between certain areas of the fan base, which I think was manipulated by the former owners. The line that I used in the documentary was that James chose hope in the form of Bury AFC. And, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about the wider models of fan-run football clubs. It's something that I believe will emerge from this pandemic as a potential blueprint for the future, not of the game in its entirety, but a certain section of the game. I think fan-run clubs like Bury AFC are a model on which football can build a credible and sustainable future.
And what do you think Mike, has been the fallout of Bury being expelled from the EFL. Do you think, or Bury Football Club being expelled from the EFL, do you think that there has been an impact on football, or do you think it just moves on and that we are, as you know, the proverbial, yesterday's news, tomorrow's chip paper? Is it just life moves on and we're forgotten about, or do you think that there has been an impact?
I think supporters of other clubs looked at what happened with the old Bury and said, basically, there but for the grace of God, go we. But football, it tends to move on very, very quickly. And, you know, the cynical view, oh, another club goes, it's small earthquake in Bury, not many people hurt, which, you know, I loathe that type of attitude, if I'm honest. I prefer to look at it another way, that what the fans have done, or a certain section of the fans have done, is, I was very struck by almost like the tone of the ground, at Redcliffe when we went to see, I saw a couple of games there, AFC games there, and I was very struck by the commitment of, people to the basics, putting flags up, making sure the nets are done, that type of stuff. But also it was that powerfully and eloquently about, which is the fact that you're seeing your mates there, you're seeing your friends. And, when we were there, the crowd was limited, through social distancing to 150, but it felt like exactly the same as, I've been fortunate in my career to have, been all around the world watching the game at some of the great stadiums. And it felt, in essence, not in volume or anything like that, but in essence, it felt the same, or the Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. It was a place where friends went to share a common passion, and that passion is football.
I think that's the first time that the Azteca Stadium has been compared to Staten Park. But I mean, yeah, 100%. James, just tell us a little bit about. I mean, it must have been a really tough decision for you to. I don't like to use the word "make the switch" because there's been for me no switch to make. We've had to be proactive. We've had to dust ourselves down and we've had to start something for the town of Bury. But tell us a little bit about your thought process and your thinking about the first time you went to see AFC. And I think it was against Steaton. I might be wrong, but I think that was the first game that you went to see.
No, you're quite right. Yeah, it was against Steaton. I really struggled with the whole, I won't say with the concept of AFC. I saw what they were doing and I thought it was absolutely fantastic in terms of community cohesion and everything. But my overriding feeling was Bury Football Club wasn't dead yet. And I say Bury Football Club wasn't dead. I was still grieving for that club that had been a defining characteristic of my life for so long. And I wasn't, as I said to Mike in the interview for the book, I wasn't sure I liked football anymore because of what had happened to us. I wasn't watching Football Focus. I wasn't reading the sports pages. I wasn't putting a bet on. And I thought my interest in football had just dissipated. But I watched the West Didsbury and Charlton game online. I did enjoy it. I surprised myself a couple of times by shouting, "Come on, Bury." Be the first to admit that. And then it was always going to be difficult, about getting to a game because of restrictions with 2020 being what it was. But Paul, who sat behind me at gig, he rang me the day before the game and he said he had a couple of spare tickets. Did I want to go? So I asked my dad if he wanted to go. And he said, yeah. And we went. And as Mike said, from the moment you first walk through the turnstiles, you see Dave Triggs. Hi, Dave, you all right? You see Dave Wright. Hi, Dave, you all right? You see Anne Bent. Hi, Anne, you all right? You see Mike Bailey. You see all these people that you know. And it just feels as though you are, it is a continuation. Like Anthony Johnson said in the Shaken Up show that was published this week, it has to be a continuation because without Bury Football Club, we wouldn't be there. And that afternoon, I mean, the winner against Steaton was incredible. It was up there with Matt Tipton against Darlington in terms of last-minute drama. But I thought the first goal, me and my dad were sat at the far end of the ground from where it was scored, and I had such a perfect view of the flight of the ball, and it really did awake something in me. When that ball hit the back of the net, I think that was the moment, more than the winner in injury time, that I thought, yes, this is, come on, I can get behind this. I'm enjoying this. And it then wasn't just about the people. It became about the game, and it becomes about the honest endeavours with which they play. You know, there's a lot in modern football to dislike, but at that first game, there was a bit of physicality to it. It might not have had some of the skill from, you know, Danny Mayer or Tony Rigby or whoever we might remember from our time at watching Bury at Gig, but it had something, it gave me back something that I hadn't had for over a year. And I walked away from the ground feeling pleased with having gone and thinking that, yeah, I can get behind this team now.
And Michael, you came, as you mentioned, you came to a couple of games, and you've told us what was your. Have you been watching football kind of in the Northwest Counties before? Have you seen any Northwest Counties game? What did you expect when you first walked in? I mean, I know when I first went to the first friendly that we played, and I just kind of didn't know where to kind of pitch myself. Is this right? Should there be a stand? Should there be seats somewhere? Where do the home supporters go? Where do the away supporters go? So I was kind of like, it was all kind of new to me. What about from your point of view, walking into Radcliffe? What vibes did you get from the setup and from seeing football at that level? Obviously, you cover it at traditionally a slightly higher level, but what was your views?
It was a bit of a return to innocence, I suppose. A lot of smiling faces when you arrived. The volunteers were great. You know, one or two, they had that sort of lollipop man, lollipop lady type vibe, you know, very helpful, wanted to help you across the road in sort of metaphorical terms, in football terms, I suppose. You know, is exactly what James talked about there, this whole idea of friends meeting one another. I got that vibe. There were things that I saw, like, you know, I noticed, for instance, and I alerted the cameraman during the game, there were a couple of scallywags in the corner trying to bunk in. Now, you know, I did that as a kid, you know, when I was at the same sort of age, about 8 years old. That's a football experience. You know, the little girl eating the halftime hot dog, that's a football experience. In terms of the quality of the football, you know, I suppose whenever I've watched football, whatever level you get, tends to be, if you look at the players themselves, in and would care to acknowledge, the difference as you go up and down the leagues is in the quality of the decisions that are made under competitive pressure. That's where, you know, occasionally, you know, a player at the sort of Northwest Counties League level would perhaps be exposed, that sort of instant decision making under pressure, and, you know, does the technique stand up under that sort of intensity? But what they all have is an ability to do something that, you know, someone, you know, all three of us couldn't do, which is this, you know, instinctive application of natural talent. You know, I saw that, you know, the goal that we featured in the documentary, you know, we were very close to that, which is obviously one of the great advantages of watching a game at non-league level. You feel it, you can hear it, you can sense it. It actually reminded me in a strange way of when I was a kid. I was at my local club, Watford, and this is, you know, in a time when dinosaurs roamed the earth, sort of 1970s, something like that. And I was entranced by it, and actually probably set me on the path to the career that I've been able to sort of, you know, cobble together. I was so close to the players, you could read the fear in their eyes sometimes, especially when a player was injured and, you know, the training was on, and you could see the insecurity that I came to realize is in you know, one's shin pad. So that intimacy I really enjoyed from non-league football. And I think going forward, I think one of the things about the pandemic is that people, it won't be a mass desertion of elite football. I think people are they're complete up with the hyper commercialization and the innate cynicism of the Champions League, the next step Champions League, the so-called Swiss model, or a Super League. You've got at the highest level, it's basically the game is being distorted by vulture capitalists like the Glazers or Stan Kroenke or the people of Fenway around Liverpool. People, I think, are going to respond to that intimacy of contact with a club. And I was speaking to a mate of mine the other day. He's a West Ham fan, and he was saying it costs me, with train fares from where we live, which is in Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, down to London, a couple of pints before the game, bit to eat. He said, if I take my son, that's 250 quid. Now, I go to my local non-league club. It's 8 quid, 10 quid to get in. I have a couple of pints with a mate, so I can change hands at half time if I want to. It's a better experience. It's a much more worthwhile experience. And so basically, I think a lot of people will vote with their feet and go and support their local club, whether that's at Northwest Counties League level or, in lower leagues. There's a supplementary chapter to the Bury AFC chapter around Accrington Stanley. Love his ethos. There's a local club which represents its community in a way that, the old Bury probably did. And, I think people will pick up on that because it's, as I said, it's almost like Back to the Future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know certainly, having spoken to James, we're really enjoying what we're seeing. And for me, I just think it feels like a step back to almost like back to reality. Like just it feels more real. It feels it's not, not what you see on the telly. It feels like a sport again. I'm sure that, are you with me on that, James? Do you agree?
Very much so. I mean, what Mike was saying about, in his past, seeing the fear in players' eyes. You can make eye contact with the players during the game and you can hear what they're shouting to each other. And, you can have a bit of a chuckle about it. Me and Tom, the director of the documentary, had a bit of we heard one example of Anglo-Saxon that was yelled across the pitch. And we both looked at each other and just burst out laughing. Now, it's a bit vulgar, but it's a connection in the same way that we'd stopped getting at Bury. One of my favourite memories at Bury was always, I think it was the first day of 03-04, we played Yeovil down at Gig, and David Nugent scored, and he ran, as he wheeled away from goal and ran towards the south stand, I was sitting on the front row, and I made eye contact with him as he celebrated, and it was those moments where you feel as though you have got that connection with your club, and players and fans are one, and we'd lost that by the end. At Bury. I mean, obviously in the last season, we had that remarkable camaraderie that goes over the line to get promoted. But before then, with the players training in Carrington, with the wages they were being paid, there was no connection with those players, like in the days when Andy Hill and Liam Robinson and Jamie Ireland and David Lee had come into the social club after games. There was none of that anymore. And I think when we can get more people into the Newven, and we can have a drink after the game and we can all get to know each other, in terms of fans and players, and fans meeting up with people they haven't been able to meet with during the pandemic, I can only see good things happening. And I think the atmosphere, as we travel around the north of England, will be absolutely fantastic.
I'm rebranding the Newven Stadium to the Radtecker Stadium, I think. So what about the supporters model then? What about the Michael? You've obviously done some research into the supporters model, and you've looked through your books at different teams, and you think it is something that is going to benefit the game going forward. Just tell us a little bit of how you think that's going to manifest itself.
It's interesting talking to Phil Young about his vision for Bury AFC, and I know he's been very influenced by the Lewis model, a club conscience, It's also inclusive in terms of, I noticed that you've got a women's team being recruited as we speak. It's this idea of a club which is transparent, it's responsive to its community. I think that is the future, because also, that we live in an age where people are accustomed to interactivity. Now, that interactivity is an impossibility at the highest level of the game, where players are commodities. They're, in essence, they're chief executives of their own multinational corporations. There isn't that. There's that. What made me write the book, Whose Game Is It Anyway, is basically, it was I'd fallen out of love with football and wanting to work out why, looking at my own experiences, having watched football in about 80 odd countries and looked at sport in so many different ways. I wanted to work out why I fell in love with the first place. And one of the reasons why I fell in love with the first place was that connectivity. And you've got that at Bury. And I think that model, the equality model that Lewis have got, I think it's fascinating. Also, we featured in the documentary, the YouTubers, hashtag, and particularly the sidemen. And I'm of a certain generation, and I'd never heard of them. But when you think about it, there's 7 guys there who have a total reach of 110 million people, followers on YouTube, which is extraordinary. Their videos, in essence, glorifying kickabouts with their mates, they've had 26 billion views. So what sort of audience is a club like that, or a group like that, reaching? The great thing about a model like AFC is that it has the ability, it's small enough to be dexterous and to actually, respond to supporter. I've been very impressed even before, I met James. I was very impressed by you guys and the social media presence that you've had, which I thought was emphasized by the way that you promoted the shirts initially. That is a group of guys, and Phil explained this, when you think about it, the volunteers, there is a certain group of volunteers at the club, as I understand it, who, let's say them to put people in boxes, but the young guys and young girls, or young women, forgive me, who understand the modern fan. And, I think that's where the future lies, is being cute enough and quick enough to actually relate to those supporters and give them something in which to believe. I have to say, when you're a Premier League club and you pay through the nose for Superstore, I think people are going to get fed up with that in the end.
I do hope that you are putting me in the bracket of the young people that are volunteers, Michael, because that really has
young and thrusting. That's what you are.
That's exactly. In fact, I'm just going to write that down. I'm going to use that on my LinkedIn profile. Young and
You've nailed in there, Mike. Certainly,
yeah. James, going forward, what would you like to see from AFC? What kind of things are you excited about seeing in the future, and where do you see the club going? It doesn't necessarily have to be kind of on the pitch, kind of, winning games or whatever, but where do you want to see the club in 5-10 years time?
Well, on the pitch, more of the same. I mean, I love the games that I went to last season. I love the atmosphere of them, and I love the style of play that Andy Welsh had us playing. But off the pitch, just more of the same. The inclusion is vital. I think, towards the end at Bury, was it just me, or was there a bit more unpleasantness? When we played Millwall down at Gig, there was that taunting down in the South Stand Manny Road end corner. Why was that? I don't seem to remember that at another time.
Barrier came over, didn't it? That someone managed to get over a barricade and throw it over. Yeah, it was like I remember.
Yeah, and obviously, Millwall had a reputation, but why did some people from Bury think that they wanted to be part of that reputation. I don't know, but yeah, more inclusion, more, well, carry on with the inclusion, but more than anything, I think I'm just looking forward to the journey about where we end up, because in my worst nightmares, when we were struggling in the mid part of the 2000s, 2 consecutive seasons, we only just avoided relegation from the league. In my worst nightmares then, we would have ended up in Conference North. If AFC can end up in Conference North, I'll be absolutely delighted. Because, to get it back into the Football League, AFC Wimbledon did it in the documentary. It's a fantastic story. But we've seen ourselves, from near neighbours like Stockport, a bit further afield, Wrexham. It's tough to get out of the non-league pyramid. And I did always feel that if Bury Football Club ended up in there, we would struggle to get out of it. But if this new entity that gives me a sense of pride about the club in the way that I didn't feel when we were throwing money about that it transpired we didn't have at the old club. If I've got a sense of pride over a club that doesn't do that, and it can end up, if it can be promoted to the Conference North with clubs like Chester, with clubs like Darlington, I will be happy with that. And I think it's all about, looking at the bigger picture of what the club is, compared to if we've got there by learning from the mistakes that were made at Bury, which, everyone to do with AFC is of the mindset we will never let that happen again. It's that old saying, isn't it? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. There's no option for fool me 3 times, because it's such a ludicrous notion. And that's why I could never back another club run by, don't want to say megalomaniac, but, that kind of single-minded person who doesn't listen to other people when things are going wrong. If we've got this group of people who are realistic enough to accept what we have and what our limitations are, bring it on, as far as I'm concerned.
And Michael, do you think we can take stock and look at models like AFC Wimbledon and as a club kind of, can we aim that high? Is it in the game? Is it possible, with all the money that's flying about, AFC Wimbledon kind of did it, 5-10 years ago. Have AFC got a chance of replicating that in the modern game?
Yeah, I probably, I take on board what James says. I think the Phoenix clubs will find their own glass ceiling. Bury, I look at, you mentioned Stockport. Stockport are obviously spending an awful lot of money to try and get into the Football League. I have to say, I loathe the Salford model. I think it's a plastic club. It's an extension. It's a vanity project for the class of '92. It's not. I just find it inauthentic. I think Bury has quickly early on through the pyramid. I think Gates. I think there will be a rapprochement eventually between the pro and anti AFC factions. I think there will be a gradual realization that you are united by much more than that which divides you. I think crowds will be good. I think what impresses me is almost like the strategic plan that the club is following. I can see that getting you into the National League North pretty quickly. I'm not saying you'll be promoted every season. The trick is going through the national leagues, which is, well, frankly, at the moment, the National League is a shambles in terms of in administrative terms. And I think more and more clubs, when you think about the National League at the moment, they're all full-timers. So the current economic climate, is that sustainable? I doubt it. So, Bury have got a question to ask themselves: can we develop the model so it's sufficiently well funded to actually get to the Football League without, basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater and essentially, mortgaging yourself to the hill? It's a strange one, because in a way, I think results are second games on that to a degree, where just enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. And if that gets you into the Football League, fantastic. I think the Football League is going to change. You know, we're looking, I think, at another decade of fundamental changes within modern football. I think I think the Super League is a gimme, made by a few elite, so-called elite club owners, for that not to happen. It's almost it's another rerun of the sort of greed which created the Premier League. So how will the EFL remodel itself? I think there will be a Premier League 2 of say 30, maybe 30, between 30 and 36 clubs. Then perhaps there'll be, so you're going to have say 96, maybe let's say as a round figure, 100 clubs in the pyramid as opposed to the 92 which exists. If there is that sort of expansion, and at the lower level it is perhaps regionalized, I can see Bury AFC having the financial wherewithal to compete and get into that pyramid. That's where I think that they've got a chance. But as it's currently constituted, the price of getting into the Football League can be ruinous, and that's what would worry me.
Yeah, and I think that came across in the documentary with speaking to some of the contributors in the documentary. Okay, just going to wrap up there. Michael, just tell us a little bit about your book and why should Bury AFC fans read it? Why would it be a good read for Bury AFC fans?
Well, it'd be so you can read the words of wisdom from James, because he is one of you. He speaks for you, as I said, very eloquently, very well. What I've tried to do within the book is, I've been extremely fortunate in terms of, being able to have my, basically football has been my life, and it's sustained me professionally and emotionally. And I try and give you a broader look, a different element of sport. So, I competed in around the yacht race, and I talk about, one of our a crew member on another boat committed suicide. So I write about that and how being away from home and away from what we term civilization in the middle of the Southern Ocean, you're never more in tune with life. So I'm showing you sport through the eyes of a beggar in Mali, the capital of Bamako, the capital of Mali, who's playing head tennis on all fours because he's paralyzed by polio, being in the Amazon jungle, meeting Ronnie Biggs, who claimed to be a Charlton fan. All these sort of different examples of a world sometimes that doesn't exist. I was brought in by Margaret Thatcher after Heysel. So I'm looking at the way politics intrudes into football, getting into countries through sport that are actually closed off to journalists. The thing about Bury and James and the Bury experience, I'll put it like that, I try and bring out the humanity of the people who are doing the right things. And so that covers Bury, that covers Accrington. I talk about Marcus Rashford and this generation of athlete activists, and also look at things like the really good coach who care for their players, and the whole thing about player welfare. So it's a very, very broad book. I say it's part memoir, part manifesto for fans of Bury AFC will actually recognise.
Fantastic. And James, you're obviously part of our heritage committee at Bury AFC. You've been doing some of the interviews with past Bury football players. Have we got any more that we can look forward to in the future? Have you got anything lined up?
There are some coming up, yeah. I've done a couple that haven't been published yet. There's one player in particular who, for people like mine and your vintage, will be very, very well received, I'd hope. But I love doing that because I read an article at the weekend about somebody saying Bobby Moore wasn't really appreciated until he died. It was written by James Corbett for the Observer Sport Monthly in 2005. And I'd hate for any Bury players to feel like that. You know, if there's one thing that I love, it's phoning a 75-year-old bloke who played for Bury and whenever, and just saying, I'm phoning on behalf of Bury Football Club. And they are so pleased that you want to talk to them about their memories. And, you know, you saw with the Tony Bartley interview online, what a legend that man is. You know, he is the most pleasant man you will ever meet. And he was so humbled to play for the club. And the thought that, you know, some of the anti-AFC lot are talking about, you know, how can you claim heritage and stuff like that? It's to show these people that they are still important to us. You know, that they gave us memories that will stay with us forever. And the club that hosted those memories was taken away from us, not through any fault of our own. And, you know, we still want to celebrate what they did, and we'll always be grateful for what they did. You know, they put their bodies on the line for, my uncle was a pro in the 70s and 80s. And I've spoken to my auntie about this. I said, you know, when you were watching him on a glue pot of a pitch in 1980 and he's involved in a crunching tackle, your heart must be in your mouth. You know, that is your financial security there that's possibly going up in smoke. You know, how does it feel? And these lads did do that for us in an age where injuries weren't treated as well as they are now. And, you know, there wasn't the advances in medicine. So to be able to talk to them, to say thank you to them, I love doing it. I love talking to former Bury players, and some of the reactions we've had to talking to former Bury players has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, and long may it continue. Michael, James, thank you very much for your time today. It's been fantastic to speak to you about a subject that we're all passionate about, and hopefully we'll be seeing you at the Rad Tecker Stadium, Andy Welsh's Barmy Harmy and all that in the new season. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Nick.
Pleasure.
My thanks goes to Michael and James for joining us on today's Shaken Up show. Thanks, guys. Don't forget, this is available as a podcast. So if you don't like seeing my face, you can get it through Apple, you can get it through Spotify, and you can get it through Acast. You can also catch us on social media. Type in Bury AFC into the search bar on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok, apparently, a platform that causes us no trouble whatsoever. We are also have a huge range of videos on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Just down here somewhere, you can see heritage stuff, quick fire questions to some of our team. And also there's a few other Shaken Up shows on there for you to look at. Until next time, we'll see you soon on the Shaken Up show. Thanks very much. Goodbye.